Interesting dinner is happening tonight at the White House. President Donald Trump will be hosting the two top Democrats in U.S. Congress. These two people, Senator Chuck Schumer and Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi. Now, this is arguably bizarre on a couple of different levels. First of all, Donald Trump has personally attacked both of these people and insulted them repeatedly. The dinner and the optics are bound to have some Republicans angry and others scratching their heads and wondering why Donald Trump is doing this. Of course, it comes just a week after Trump bypassed his own party and cut a deal, yes, with the Democrats on both the budget and federal hurricane relief money. So here's the question. Has Donald Trump gone rogue? Is he playing footsie with the Democrats? Is he thinking about going independent? We've got our political analyst, Steve Farnsworth, standing by, and our Republican strategist, Cory Crowley, also standing by. Let's bring them both into the conversation. Steve, let me start with you. What do you make about this dinner party?
Well, I think it makes sense for any president to talk to political leaders of both parties and see where there are areas of potential agreement. And for Donald Trump, who really doesn't have the same kind of fixed partisan loyalty that you've seen in many presidents, this makes double sense. I'm not sure that Republicans are going to like it. I'm not sure the Democrats are going to be able to get much out of it. But conversation always seems like a good idea in this kind of a situation.
Cory, I would call you sort of a moderate Republican, and I'm curious to get your take on this meeting and whether you think Republicans should be worried about Trump. Is he crossing party lines, or is this just him trying to be bipartisan?
Well, I think this is the way government should work. And to that extent, I hope that this is a new Donald Trump who's seen the light. Now, we've all hoped that a lot of times over the course of the last couple of years. So maybe it's here to stay and maybe it's not. But, you know, there's a long history of presidents working across the aisle. Ronald Reagan famously worked with Democrat Tip O'Neill. Bill Clinton passed welfare reform and several other major pieces of legislation by working with Republicans who controlled Congress at the time. And so things get done when you talk across the aisle. When you insulate yourself, like we saw from President Obama in the last 8 years, very little gets accomplished. And you've got to remember that anything you accomplish in a hyper-partisan way can be very easily undone in an equally partisan way when the other party takes over.
This is what is so interesting about Donald Trump is we know, Steve, that for many years he was in fact a registered Democrat. And there are those who don't even consider him really to be a Republican, that he sort of took over the party, but it was a bit of a hostile takeover. And there continues to be, a lot of Republicans who are uncomfortable with him as their leader, ostensibly, even though he did win. And so they're trying to move past that. I'm curious whether you think this is a sign that Trump is perhaps going toward a more independent strategy here, because, the New York Times for the past couple of days has been printing a lot of articles saying, that it's possible Trump could try and leave the Republican Party and become an independent, which is what he's arguably always been.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump's party is the party of Donald Trump. He has done very little to help Republicans. He has done very little to help Democrats, for that matter. His main purpose is to help Donald Trump. And so I think that it makes sense to imagine Donald Trump as relatively independent. But it's very hard to imagine a successful presidential campaign outside of the two-party system. I think there are so many people who are reflexively Democrats and reflexively Republicans that the smart way for any kind of independent person to succeed in search for political office is to join one of the two parties and try to have a hostile or not so hostile takeover with inside the party. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did. Why would he give up all those elected Republicans who are going to try to help him, at least a little bit, if he's in office? And so being an independent, I don't think serves his purposes at all. It's also important to realize that the Democrats are not particularly going to be inclined to embrace Trump either. I think that when you look at the situation with the things that he's done with respect to immigration, with respect to gay rights, with respect to abortion, there are all kinds of social issues and economic issues in terms of tax cuts for the wealthy that are going to find a very inhospitable environment among Democrats. And so there are going to be significant differences. Whether or not they can make a deal on some small things, those big differences will remain.
The United States is so hyper-partisan, Cory, as you know well, and so polarized between the right and the left. How do you think your party is going to react to this dinner tonight?
Well, I think the practical people in my party, particularly the people who run Congress, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, while they'd like to have a seat at the table, I think, to be part of these conversations, at the end of the day, they just want to move the ball and pass legislation that's good for the American public. And so I think that they're pragmatic enough to understand that. What I think Donald Trump needs to be afraid of in doing this is his own political base. People like Bannon, who's now on the outside, people like Reince Priebus, folks like that, who are now all outsiders and are staunchly conservative and helped put him into office. And those are the people who are going to be upset by this, who are going to attack him, who are going to say, hey, we put you there, and now you're totally abandoning us. And so that's going to be the tightrope that he's got to walk over the course of the next few weeks while trying to deal with this. And it could cause him to lose some credibility with the people who've supported him all the while.
You mentioned Steve Bannon, and I want to get Steve Farnsworth's read on that. So Steve Bannon gives this pretty interesting interview a couple of days ago on 60 Minutes. And during that interview, he says that he predicts there will be a Republican civil war by February or March of 2018 over immigration and a number of other things. He says that the Republican establishment still has not realized what the election of Donald Trump actually means to the party itself, and they continue to act like Republican establishment politicians. And I'm curious, Steve, whether you think we are going to see that. I mean, is the Republican Party on the verge of a civil war or possibly a breakup?
Well, civil war and breakup, those sound pretty extreme. I think I'd rather go with something along the lines of more like a Republican identity crisis as I look at this situation. You're looking at an environment where there are two very, very different ideas about how the Republican Party should go forward. It doesn't make sense, as Steve Bannon talks about, to go down a more populist road. Or does it make sense to go down a road that is friendlier to trade, that is friendlier towards a global environment, that looks towards tax issues rather than those kind of divisive social concerns that sometimes animate Republicans? And so the Republican Party isn't sure which way to go because there are different people elected in different places with different messages, and they really don't have a lot of overlap. I mean, for years and years and years, just to pick on a trade, for example, a key issue with respect to the U.S.-Canada relationship, the Republican Party has been the most vigorous advocate of free trade and freer trade, thinking that it leads to economic advantage. Donald Trump ran exactly against that message within the Republican Party and nevertheless became the nominee. That issue, as much as any, really does speak to the kind of unbridgeable gap, if you will, between the Republicans who are of the Steve Bannon populist dynamic and the more conventional business-oriented Republicans that have usually held sway within the party.
Yeah, great point. You know, Cory, I mean, Steve Bannon, he admits himself a street fighter and a bomb thrower, and yet are you concerned at all about what he's saying, that this, and again, these moves by Donald Trump to reach out to the Democrats, this dinner tonight, what he said about immigration, saying Congress has to figure out a solution, that this could somehow rip your party apart?
Well, I think it's important to look back at history and remember that just a decade ago, this issue did rip our party apart. George Bush was president in 2007, a large proponent of the Gang of Six bill that was worked on to try to get a comprehensive immigration reform done when Republicans controlled everything. And we had a very hard time at it. And our party lost donors. We had uprisings. The Tea Party was happening. And it was hard to recover from. It took 5 years till the elections of 2010, really, and 2012 for us to win anything again. And so, but I think this happens often within parties. Donald Trump is a personality that's bigger and larger than Bush was back then. And so maybe he can convince people who tend to believe everything he says is true and all else is false. Maybe he can convince them that working with Democrats, putting this issue behind us, which is what my party's wanted to do a long time, is just get this issue done so we can move on to all the other things that affect the country. And if he can accomplish that, then more power to him.
Gentlemen, great to have you on. Thanks for this today, as always.
Thanks, Todd.